The stars were cold and silent in the outer rim. Captain Velthar stretched his forearms and looked at the readings on his screen. His ship, the Harmony's Edge, had been floating through empty space for weeks. The Velkari exploration mission was almost over and they had found nothing interesting. "Captain," called his sensor officer from across the bridge. "I'm getting something strange." Velthar's ears twitched with interest. After 20 years of space travel, very few things surprised him anymore. "What kind of strange?" "There's a ship out there, a big one, but it's not like anything in our records." The captain moved to the sensor station. On the screen he could see a dark shape floating among the rocks and debris of what looked like an old battlefield. The ship was huge, maybe a kilometer long. Its metal hull was black and covered with scars from many battles. "How old do you think it is?" Velthar asked. "The metal shows signs of extreme age, maybe thousands of years. But Captain, there's something else. The ship is still powered. I'm reading energy signatures from inside." Velthar felt his hearts beat faster. A ship that old should be completely dead. No power, no life, nothing. But this one was different. "Send a message to the Galactic Council," he ordered. "Tell them we found something unusual. Then prepare a boarding team." Commander Zyftos led the boarding party. He was young for a Velkari, only 50 years old, but he was brave and smart. He took 5 others with him on the small shuttle that flew toward the ancient ship. As they got closer, Zyftos could see the damage on the ship's hull. There were holes from weapons fire, burn marks from energy blasts, and scars that looked like they came from close combat. Whatever this ship was, it had seen many battles. "Look for a way inside," Zyftos told his team. "Be careful. We don't know what's in there." They found a large crack in the hull. The shuttle attached itself to the ship and the boarding team put on their spacesuits. One by one, they crawled through the crack and into the unknown vessel. Inside, emergency lights began to flicker on. The ship's systems were responding to their presence. The corridors were wide and built for being smaller than the Velkari. The walls were made of a metal they didn't recognize, and everything had a strange, alien design. "The air is breathable," reported Kexara, the team's science officer. "The ship is maintaining life support." They moved deeper into the ship. The corridors were clean but felt empty, like a tomb. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. Then they found the first chamber. It was enormous. The ceiling stretched high above them, and the room was filled with rows upon rows of strange pods. Each pod was made of clear material, and inside each one was a being unlike anything they had ever seen. "By the stars," whispered Zyftos. The beings were smaller than Velkari, with pale skin and no fur. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs, and their faces were smooth except for hair on their heads. Most shocking of all, they were alive. The pods were keeping them in some kind of deep sleep. "There must be 1,000 of them," said Kexara. "All in hibernation." Zyftos moved closer to one of the pods. The being inside looked young, but there were scars on its visible skin. Old wounds that had healed long ago. This was not a civilian or a traitor. This was a warrior. "Check the other rooms," he ordered his team. What they found made the mystery deeper. There were armories filled with weapons they couldn't understand, medical bays with equipment designed for emergency surgery, training rooms with targets shot full of holes. Everything pointed to one conclusion: this ship belonged to soldiers. In what looked like the command center, they found a computer terminal that was still working. The screen showed symbols in an unknown language, but there were also images. Pictures of space battles, of burning worlds, of these strange beings fighting against something dark and terrible. "Commander," called one of his officers from another room. "You need to see this." Zyftos followed the voice and found himself in what appeared to be a personal quarters. The walls were covered with small objects, pictures, medals, weapons, and other items. In the pictures he could see the sleeping beings, but they were awake and wearing armor. They stood together in groups, their faces serious and determined. But it was the other images that made his blood cold. Pictures of creatures that looked like living nightmares. Things that seemed to be made of dark metal and hunger. In every picture. These nightmare creatures were fighting the small beings from the pods. "What do you think happened here?" asked Kexara. "I think," said Zyphtos slowly, "we've found the survivors of a war. A very old war." They continued exploring. In another section of the ship, they found personal belongings, clothes sized for the sleeping beings, food containers that were empty but showed signs of having been used many times, children's toys that were worn from years of play. These weren't just soldiers. They were people with families, with lives, with homes they had left behind. The ship's computer began to respond to their presence. Screens came alive with more images and symbols. The ship was trying to communicate with them, but the language was completely unknown. "We need to get linguists here," said Zyphtos, "and scientists, and probably the Council's military advisors." "Why the military?" asked Kexara. Zyphtos pointed to the sleeping beings. "Look at them closely. Really look." Kexara studied the nearest pod. The being inside was female, young-looking but with scars on her hands and arms. Her body was lean and strong, like someone who had trained for combat every day of her life. But it was her face that was most disturbing. Even in sleep it looked hard and watchful, like someone who had learned never to truly relax. "They're all like this," Zyphtos continued. "Every single one. These aren't refugees or explorers. These are people who have known nothing but war. They spent hours exploring the ship. The more they saw, the more questions they had. The technology was incredibly advanced, far beyond anything the current galaxy possessed. The weapons were designed, not just to kill, but to fight things that were very hard to kill. The medical equipment was built to keep people fighting even when they were badly hurt. Everything about the ship spoke of a long, desperate struggle against something terrible. As they prepared to return to the Harmony's edge, Zyphtos took one last look at the sleeping beings, 1,000 warriors from an unknown time and place, carrying the memories of battles that the galaxy had forgotten. "Should we wake them?" asked Kexara. "Not yet," said Zyphtos. "First, we need to understand what we've found. These beings and their ship, they're not just relics from the past. They're something the galaxy has never seen before." He paused and looked around the vast chamber filled with sleeping warriors. "They're weapons that think and breathe and dream, and I have a feeling that when they wake up, everything is going to change." The boarding team returned to their ship, carrying data recordings and images of their discovery. Behind them, the ancient vessel continued its lonely drift through space, its 1,000 passengers sleeping peacefully in their pods, unaware that they had been found. In the depths of the ship, ancient computers continued their eternal watch, maintaining the hibernation systems and waiting for the day when their charges would be needed again. That day was coming sooner than anyone could imagine. 3 days later, the ancient ship was surrounded by vessels from across the galaxy. Scientists, linguists, military experts, and diplomats had all come to see the mysterious discovery. The Galactic Council had sent their best people, but they were all nervous about what they might find. Captain Velthar stood in the chamber with the sleeping pods, watching as Dr. Xanthara, the galaxy's top xenobiologist, studied the hibernation systems. "The technology is incredible," Dr. Xanthara said, running her scanner over one of the pods. "These systems have been running perfectly for thousands of years. The beings inside are in perfect health. Can we wake one of them safely?" asked Council Representative Morden. "I believe so. But Captain, are you sure this is wise? We know nothing about these creatures. They could be dangerous." Captain Velthar looked at the sleeping warriors. "We need answers, and they're the only ones who can give them to us." They chose a pod near the center of the chamber. Inside was a male being with short dark hair and several scars on his face and arms. His body looked strong but tired, like someone who had fought too many battles. Dr. Xanthara worked carefully with the pod's controls. The ancient technology was complex, but after hours of study, she thought she understood how it worked. "Beginning revival process," she announced. The pod began to hum softly. Lights flickered along its surface. Inside, the sleeping being's breathing changed. His eyes moved under his closed eyelids. Slowly, very slowly, he began to wake up. His eyes opened, suddenly wide and alert. He sat up quickly, looking around the chamber with the practiced gaze of a soldier checking for threats. When he saw the aliens surrounding him, his hand moved instinctively to where a weapon might have been. "Easy," said Dr. Zenthara, holding up her hands. "We're friends, you're safe." The being spoke in a language none of them understood. His voice was rough, like someone who hadn't spoken in a very long time. He kept looking around the chamber, taking in every detail. "Computer," called Captain Velthar to the ship's AI. "Can you translate?" The ship's ancient systems came alive. Lights flashed on panels around the chamber. Then suddenly the being spoke again, and this time they could understand him. "Where are we? What happened to the war?" His voice was urgent, concerned. "What war?" asked Representative Morden. The being looked at him with confusion. "The war, against the Devourers. How long have we been asleep? Did we win?" The aliens looked at each other. None of them had heard of any Devourers. "What's your name?" Dr. Zenthara asked gently. "Taman, combat engineer, 3rd Battalion, Human Defense Force," he answered automatically, like he had said these words many times before. "I need to report to command. Where is Admiral Jun-Ho?" "Human?" asked Captain Velthar. "Is that what your species is called?" Taimin stared at him. "You don't know what humans are? What species are you? Where are the other races from the Alliance?" Dr. Zenthara spoke softly. "Taimin, I think you've been asleep for a very long time. We don't know about any alliance or any war with Devourers. We found your ship drifting in space." Taimin was quiet for a long moment, then he asked, "How long?" "We estimate at least 3,000 years. The human was silent. His face went very pale. Then he asked in a whisper, "The others? Are they alive?" "They're sleeping like you were. We can wake them if you want." "Yes," said Taimin immediately. "Wake Hana first. She's our engineer. Then Do Hyun. He's tactical. We need to assess our situation." They moved to another pod. Inside was a female human with long black hair. She looked younger than Taimin but had the same alert, warrior-like appearance. When Hana woke up, she was just as quick and alert as Taimin. Her first words were, "Status report." 3,000 years, Hana," Taimin said quietly. "We've been asleep for 3,000 years." Hana sat in silence for a moment. Then she started asking technical questions about the ship's condition, about their location, about the aliens who had found them. Her mind was working quickly, processing information and making plans. They woke Do Hyun next. He was a calm man with steady eyes and hands that never stopped moving, always ready for action. When he learned about the situation, he asked immediately about potential threats and escape routes. The fourth to wake was So Young, who had been the ship's medical officer. She immediately started checking on her fellow humans, making sure the hibernation process hadn't harmed them. As more humans awakened, the aliens began to understand what they were dealing with. These weren't ordinary people. Every human, male or female, young or old, showed the same traits. They were alert, disciplined, and constantly aware of their surroundings. They moved with the efficiency of people who had trained together for years. But most disturbing of all, they all asked the same questions. Where was the enemy? How was the war going? What was their mission? "There is no war," Representative Morden tried to explain. "The galaxy has been at peace for centuries." The humans looked at each other. Taimin spoke for all of them. "If there's no war, then we won. The sacrifice worked." "What sacrifice?" asked Dr. Zenthara. "The final offensive. We gave everything to stop the Devourers from reaching the inner systems. Earth, the colonies, all of it." Taiman's voice was heavy with old grief. "We were supposed to be the survivors, the witnesses. We carry the memories of humanity's last stand." So Young, who had been quiet while examining the hibernation systems, looked up. "Tae-min, there's something wrong. The navigation computer shows we drifted much farther than we should have. We're not in the same galaxy anymore." The humans became very still. Do-hyun asked quietly. Are you saying we never made it to the rally point? I'm saying we never made it anywhere. The navigation system failed after we entered hibernation. We've been drifting in dark space for 3 millennia. The weight of this information settled over everyone. The humans had expected to wake up to news of victory or defeat. Instead, they had woken up in a completely different galaxy, surrounded by species they had never seen, with no way to know if their sacrifice had meant anything. Hana was the first to speak. Then we're the last humans in existence. Not necessarily, said Taimin. If the Devourers were stopped, there might be other survivors. Colonies that were protected, ships that escaped. After 3,000 years? Asked So Young. Even if some survived, they wouldn't be the same people. We knew. They'd be strangers. Do-hyun stood up and walked to one of the chamber's windows. Outside, he could see the alien ships surrounding their vessel. We need to understand this new galaxy. Learn about the species here, their capabilities, their threats. Why? Asked Representative Morden. Do-hyun turned to look at him. Because that's what we do. We're soldiers. We protect people from threats they can't handle themselves. But there are no threats, insisted the representative. We have peace. The humans looked at each other again. There was something in their expressions that made the aliens uncomfortable. It was the look of people who knew things others didn't, who had seen darkness that others couldn't imagine. Peace doesn't last, said Taemin quietly. There's always something out there in the dark, waiting. We've learned that the hard way. Hana started working on the ship's computers, trying to access their historical records. If we're going to live in this galaxy, we need to understand it, and they need to understand us. What do you mean? Asked Dr. Zenthara. So Young answered. She means you need to know what humans are capable of, what we've done, what we've survived, what we can teach you. And what we might have to do again, added Do-hyun, still looking out at the stars, if the peace you're so proud of ever comes to an end. The aliens didn't understand then what the humans meant. They couldn't imagine that these thousands sleeping warriors carried knowledge that might someday save or damn them all, but they were about to learn. The great assembly hall on Zenthar Prime had never seen such panic. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their floating seats, all talking at once. The discovery of the humans had spread across the galaxy in just days, and the reaction was not what anyone had expected. Prime Minister Kethala called for order. Her voice was calm, but her 4 eyes showed the strain she was feeling. We are here to discuss the human situation. Captain Velthar will present his report. Captain Velthar stood at the center of the hall. Around him, holographic displays showed images from the human ship, the sleeping pods, the weapons, the battle-scarred corridors. The humans have been awake for a week now, he began. We have learned much about them, and frankly I am concerned. Murmurs filled the hall. Representatives leaned forward in their seats. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, Velthar continued. Their weapons can destroy ships with a single shot. Their medical systems can heal injuries that would kill any of us. But it's not their technology that worries me the most. He activated another display. This one showed video recordings of the humans during their first days of awakening. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single machine. Even when resting, they remained alert and ready for action. These beings are not like us. They do not think like us. Every human, from the youngest to the oldest, is a trained killer. They have been shaped by war in ways we cannot understand. A representative from the Aquari system spoke up. Are they hostile? No, said Velthar. They are polite and cooperative, but they see everything through the lens of combat. When they look at our peaceful worlds, they see targets that need defending. When they look at our trade routes, they see supply lines that could be cut. When they look at us, they see civilians who cannot protect themselves. The hall erupted in concerned voices. Representatives demanded to know what the humans wanted, whether they could be trusted, whether they should be allowed to remain free. Prime Minister Kethala raised her hand for silence. Have they made any demands? They ask for 3 things: said Captain Velthar. First, they want to examine our military capabilities and defenses. Second, they want access to our historical records to understand what threats we have faced. Third, they want to meet with our military leaders. Why? Asked the Zenthari defense minister. They say they want to help us prepare. Prepare for what? That's what concerns me most. They won't say. They just keep insisting that peace never lasts and that we need to be ready for war. At that moment, the hall's main doors opened. 5 figures walked in, humans who had been invited to address the council. Seok-Jin led the group, his military bearing obvious even in civilian clothes. Behind him came Hana, Do-hyun, So-young, and Taemin. The humans looked small compared to most of the alien species in the hall, but something about them made everyone fall silent. They moved with quiet confidence, their eyes constantly scanning for threats that didn't exist. Prime Minister Kethala spoke first. Welcome, humans. We are honored by your presence. Please, tell us about yourselves. Seok-Jin stepped forward. Thank you, Prime Minister. I am Seok-Jin, former colonel in the Human Defense Force. These are my colleagues. We come in peace, seeking only to understand this galaxy and perhaps to be useful to it. His voice was calm and professional, but there was something underneath it, a hardness that made the aliens uncomfortable. We understand you have survived a great war, said the Prime Minister. We have survived the greatest war, Seok-Jin corrected gently. For 2 centuries, humanity fought against an enemy that wanted to consume all life in the galaxy. We learned things about warfare, about survival, about sacrifice that no species should have to learn. But you won, said a representative from the core worlds. We stopped them, said Seok-Jin, at great cost. Our homeworld is gone. Our colonies are gone. Most of our people are gone. We 1,000 are all that remain of a species that once numbered in the billions. The hall was completely silent now. The weight of those words settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. Hana stepped forward. We don't want your pity. We're not here to mourn what we lost. We're here because we've seen what's possible in this universe. We've seen how quickly peace can turn to war, how fast civilization can fall. Your galaxy has been peaceful for centuries, added Do-hyun. That's wonderful. But peace is fragile. It only takes one aggressive species, one desperate enemy, one mistake to shatter everything you've built. Are you threatening us? Demanded the Aquari representative. No, said So-young, quietly. We're trying to help you. You've built something beautiful here. A galaxy where different species work together, where conflicts are resolved through diplomacy. But you've also made yourselves soft. Soft? The Prime Minister's voice was sharp. Taemin answered. Your military forces are designed for peacekeeping, not warfighting. Your planets have no real defenses. Your people don't know how to fight or hide or run when they need to. If a real threat ever appeared, you would be helpless. The humans looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of aliens who were beginning to understand what they were saying. We don't want to change your society, said Seok-Jin. We don't want to make you into warriors like us, but we can teach you how to protect what you've built, how to be ready for threats you can't imagine. What kind of threats? Asked the defense minister. The humans looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. The enemy we fought called themselves the Devourers, said Hana. They were not a species like you or us. They were something else. They turned matter itself into more of themselves, consuming entire star systems to grow stronger. They started. Small, added Do-hyun. Just a few ships from outside the galaxy. By the time we understood what they were, they had already consumed dozens of worlds. They grew exponentially, becoming more powerful with every victory. How did you defeat them? Asked the Prime Minister. We didn't defeat them, said Seok-Jin. We hurt them badly enough to make them retreat, but creatures like that don't die easily. They adapt, they learn, they come back stronger. Are you saying they might return? I'm saying something like them always returns, said So-young. The universe is vast and dark and full of things that want to destroy what you've built. Your peace has lasted because you've been lucky. Luck runs out. The hall erupted again. Some representatives were angry, saying the humans were trying to scare them. Others were thoughtful, wondering if the warnings might be true. A few looked terrified at the idea of facing enemies they couldn't understand. Prime Minister Kethala called for order again. What exactly are you proposing? Let us study your defenses, said Sokjin. Let us share what we know about warfare and survival. Let us help you prepare for threats that might never come. If we're wrong and your peace lasts forever, then you'll have wasted some resources on unnecessary preparations. If we're right, he didn't finish the sentence, he didn't need to. We'll consider your proposal, said the Prime Minister. But I must ask, what do you gain from this? Taman answered. Purpose. We're soldiers without a war, protectors without people to protect. You could give us a reason to keep existing. And if we say no, then we'll find a quiet corner of the galaxy and live out our days in peace, said Hana. But we'll always be watching the sky, waiting for the darkness to return. The humans left the hall then, walking together with the same quiet discipline they had shown when they entered. Behind them, the representatives began the most important debate in galactic history. They couldn't know that their decision would determine whether their civilization would survive the storm that was already coming. The humans could see it in their faces, in their body language, in their complete lack of readiness for what the universe could throw at them. The galaxy had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten how to recognize the signs of approaching war. But the humans knew those signs. They had lived with them for centuries, and deep in the dark spaces between galaxies, something old and hungry was beginning to stir, drawn by the energy signatures of a thriving civilization that had grown fat and complacent in its prosperity. The humans could feel it coming, they always could. Mireille had always loved ancient puzzles, but this one was different. The human data files were like nothing she had ever seen. Each record was encrypted multiple times, hidden behind layers of security that spoke of desperate paranoia and terrible secrets. She worked in the research center on Zenthar Prime, surrounded by the galaxy's best linguists and archaeologists. They had been studying human records for weeks, slowly piecing together the story of humanity's war against the Devourers. Look at this, called Dr. Nexels from his workstation. I've decoded another battle report. The humans fought something at a place called Kepler Station. The report is disturbing. Mireille moved to his screen. The translated text made her stomach turn. It described enemy creatures that could remake themselves from the bodies of the dead, weapons that turned matter into more enemies, and human tactics that seemed impossibly brutal. They orbital bombed their own colonies, Dr. Nexels said quietly. Rather than let them fall to the enemy, they destroyed them completely. Billions of their own people. Keep reading, Mireille said. There's more. The report continued with clinical descriptions of scorched earth tactics, the systematic destruction of everything that could be useful to the enemy. The humans had not just fought the Devourers. They had denied them resources by destroying entire star systems. This can't be accurate, said another researcher. No species would willingly destroy so much. It's accurate, came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Yanwu, one of the younger humans who had begun working with the research team. She was barely 25 by human standards, but her eyes held the same weight as the older warriors. You were there? Asked Dr. Nexels. No, but my parents were. I was born on the evacuation ships during the final retreat. Yanwu moved to look at the screen. Kepler Station was my mother's birthplace. She told me about the decision to bomb. How could they make such a choice? Asked Mireille. Because the alternative was worse, Yanwu said simply. If the Devourers had taken the station, they would have used everything there, the people, the resources, the technology, to make more of themselves. Every human who died in the bombing was one less weapon the enemy could use against us. She touched the screen gently, as if remembering faces she had never seen. My mother said the hardest part wasn't the dying. It was living with the knowledge that it was necessary. Mireille felt a chill. These humans weren't monsters. They were people who had been forced to become monsters to survive. Over the following days, more records were decoded. Each one revealed new horrors. The Devourers had been unlike any enemy the current galaxy could imagine. They didn't conquer. They consumed. They didn't negotiate. They absorbed. They turned entire civilizations into raw materials for their expansion. Here's something interesting, called Dr. Vexara from the main terminal. I've found Admiral Junho's final broadcast, the one sent just before humanity's last offensive. The recording appeared on the central screen. A human man in military uniform looked directly at them across 3,000 years. His face was exhausted but determined. To any who find this record, Admiral Junho said, know that humanity died fighting. We chose to sacrifice everything rather than let the Devourers spread beyond our galaxy. The offensive you are about to witness represents the coordinated suicide of an entire species. The researchers fell silent. This was the voice of a man ordering the death of his own people. The Devourers cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with, the Admiral continued. They exist only to consume. They have taken our worlds, our colonies, our hope. But they will not take our future. We will burn ourselves out like a star going supernova, and in that burning, we will wound them badly enough to stop their advance. The recording paused as the Admiral looked away, as if gathering strength for what came next. The 1,000 aboard the Eternal Vigil carry our complete tactical database and genetic records. If they survive, they are our gift to whatever galaxy they find. Learn from our mistakes, prepare for what we could not stop. Mireille realized she was holding her breath. Around the room, other researchers were equally transfixed. The weapons we used in the final offensive will scatter the Devourers across dark space, Admiral Junho said, but they will not destroy them completely. They will regenerate, they will adapt, and someday they will return. When they do, remember that we bought you time with our lives. Use it wisely. The recording ended. The room was completely silent. How long ago was this sent? Whispered Dr. Nexels. According to the timestamp, exactly 3,217 years ago, Mireille said. Yan Wu was studying another screen. Mireille, you need to see this. I've found something in the long-range sensor data. Mireille moved to her workstation. The display showed deep space scans from the galaxy's edge, data collected by automated monitoring stations. What am I looking at? Energy signatures that match the Devourer profiles in our records. Very faint, very far away, but getting stronger. Mireille's blood went cold. You're saying they're coming back? I'm saying they never left. They've been out there, in the dark between galaxies, slowly rebuilding themselves, and now they're moving again. Dr. Nexels rushed to his own terminal. I'll contact the Galactic Council immediately. Wait, said Yanwu. You need to understand what you're dealing with first. The humans who woke up from the ship, they know this was coming. They've been preparing for it since the day they arrived. How could they know? Because they understand the enemy better than anyone. The Devourers are patient. They can wait centuries or millennia to heal from their wounds, but they never forget. And they never give up. Mireille looked at the data again. The energy signatures were still faint, still distant, but they were definitely getting stronger. How long do we have? Yanwu consulted the human tactical programs. Based on the pattern of their approach and the energy levels we're detecting, I estimate 6 months before the first scouts reach the outer systems. 6 months, repeated Dr. Nexels, to prepare for an enemy that destroyed humanity. No, said Yanwu firmly. 6 months to prepare for an enemy that humanity wounded. We know their weaknesses now. We know their tactics. And this time they're not facing just humans. She stood up and faced the other researchers. This galaxy has hundreds of species, thousands of worlds, resources that humanity could never dream of. If we can unite them, if we can teach them what we learned, we might actually win this time. And if we can't? Yunwu's expression grew hard, and for a moment she looked exactly like the older human warriors. Then we'll make the same choice humanity made 3,000 years ago. We'll burn everything rather than let them take it. Mireille realized that the humans hadn't just brought tactical knowledge to their galaxy. They had brought a way of thinking. That was completely alien to peaceful civilizations. The willingness to sacrifice everything to protect what mattered most. The question was whether the galaxy could learn to think like that before it was too late. Outside, the monitoring stations continued their watch on the dark edges of space, where ancient enemies were stirring from their long sleep. The energy signatures grew stronger each day, heralding the return of something that had once consumed entire star systems. But this time, they would not face a lone humanity fighting desperately against impossible odds. This time, they would face a galaxy that had been warned, prepared, and taught by the survivors of the greatest war in history. The humans had spent 3,000 years in hibernation, carrying the knowledge their species had bought with blood and sacrifice. Now it was time to see if that knowledge could save a civilization that had never known true war. The countdown had begun, and somewhere in the dark, ancient hunger was waking up. The first attack came without warning. Outer Colony 7, a peaceful mining world on the galaxy's edge, simply stopped transmitting. One moment they were sending routine status reports. The next there was nothing but silence. Captain Velthar led the rescue fleet to investigate. What they found made veteran spacers sick to their stomachs. The planet was still there, but it was wrong. The surface had been stripped clean and reformed into strange geometric patterns. The cities were gone. The people were gone. Everything organic had been consumed and converted into something else. By the stars, whispered his communications officer. What happened here? Velthar knew exactly what had happened, but he didn't want to believe it. The humans had been right. The Devourers were back. He activated the emergency channel to Zenthar Prime. This is Captain Velthar. Outer Colony 7 has fallen to hostile forces. I need immediate contact with the human advisors. The response came within minutes. Not from the Council, but directly from the humans themselves. This is Kyung-Soo. We're already mobilizing. Send us all your sensor data and get your ships out of there, now. But the colonists are gone. Kyung-Soo's voice was gentle but firm. Captain, I know this is hard to accept, but anyone who was on that planet is beyond help. All you can do now is make sure the same thing doesn't happen to other worlds. Velthar looked at the twisted remains of what had once been a thriving colony. Millions of beings had lived here just days ago. Now there was nothing but alien architecture and the growing certainty that the galaxy's peaceful age was over. Within hours, reports started coming in from across the outer rim. Colony after colony went dark. Trade ships vanished without distress calls. Entire star systems began broadcasting strange signals that hurt to listen to. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. This time, the Great Hall was filled with panic instead of debate. Representatives demanded answers, protection, explanations that no one could give. The humans entered together, moving with the calm efficiency that had become familiar to those who worked with them. But now that calmness was terrifying rather than reassuring, because it meant they had expected this all along. Seok-Jin took the center of the hall. Around him, holographic displays showed the spread of Devourer attacks across the galaxy's edge. The enemy has returned, he said simply. They have been rebuilding themselves in dark space for 3 millennia, and now they are strong enough to begin their expansion again. How many of them are there? Demanded the Prime Minister. Unknown, but based on the pattern of attacks, we estimate they are starting with the same strategy they used against humanity. Small scouting forces to test our defenses, followed by exponential growth as they consume resources and convert them into more of themselves. To-hyun activated another display. They're being more careful this time. Instead of the rapid expansion they used before, they're establishing secure forward positions before moving deeper into the galaxy. Can we negotiate with them? Asked a representative from the core worlds. The humans looked at each other with expressions that mixed pity and grim humor. You can try, said So-Young, but they don't communicate in any way we understand. They don't want territory or resources or political power. They want to convert all matter in the universe into more of themselves. There's no negotiating with that. Bora stepped forward. She had been working with the Council's logistics department for months, but Few of the representatives had paid much attention to her. "We've been preparing for this," she said. "Emergency evacuation plans for the outer colonies, supply lines that can function under attack, defensive positions that can be held even against superior forces. You've been planning to abandon our worlds?" The Aquari representative was outraged. "We've been planning to save your people," Wu Jin replied. "Every world you try to hold without proper preparation is another population center the enemy can consume. Every failed defense gives them more resources to use against you." The hall erupted, in angry voices. Representatives accused the humans of cowardice, of giving up without fighting, of treating their worlds as expendable. Taemin's voice cut through the noise. "We watched the enemy consume Earth." The hall fell silent. "Earth," Taemin continued, "was the most heavily defended planet in human space. Orbital fortresses, planetary shields, defense fleets that could destroy entire armadas. We threw everything we had at them and it wasn't enough. The planet fell in 6 hours. Then how do we fight them?" asked the Prime Minister. Janae had been working with the Council's military planners, teaching them concepts that no peaceful civilization wanted to learn. Now she spoke with the authority of someone who had seen too much death. "You fight them the way we learned to fight them. You hit them where they're weak and run when they're strong. You deny them resources by destroying anything you can't defend. You accept that some battles can't be won and focus on winning the war. That's not how civilized beings conduct warfare," protested the defense minister. "Civilized warfare is a luxury," said Hana quietly. "When you're fighting for the survival of all life in the galaxy, you use whatever tactics work." She activated a display showing human battle records from the final war. "We tried civilized warfare at first. Formal battles, rules of engagement, protection for civilians. We lost every single engagement until we learned to fight like they do. Without mercy, without hesitation, without limits." The representatives stared at images of human forces using tactics that horrified them. Kamikaze attacks where entire fleets sacrificed themselves to destroy single enemy ships. Poisoned worlds that were made uninhabitable rather than allowed to fall. Cities that were evacuated and then destroyed by their own people. "You're asking us to become monsters," whispered someone from the back of the hall. "We're asking you to become survivors," said Seok Jin. "The choice is yours. Fight like us and maybe live, or fight like you always have, and definitely die." Over the next weeks, as more colonies fell and the enemy presence grew stronger, the galaxy began to change. Some worlds refused to evacuate, insisting they could defend themselves. Those worlds went dark within days. Others followed human evacuation protocols and managed to save most of their populations. The humans dispersed throughout the galaxy, each becoming the center of a growing resistance cell. They taught alien military forces tactics that went against everything they believed in. They showed civilian populations how to hide, how to run, how to survive when their governments could no longer protect them. Kyung-soo found himself working with species who had never imagined they would need to learn guerrilla warfare. He taught them how to fight from the shadows, how to strike at enemy supply lines, how to make every conquered world cost the enemy more than it was worth. "The key," he explained to a group of Zenthari military officers, "is not to win battles. It's to make them pay such a high price for every victory that they can't afford to keep advancing." "But what about honor?" asked one officer. "What about protecting our people?" "Honor is meaningless if your species goes extinct," Kyung-soo replied. "And the best way to protect your people is to keep them alive, even if it means doing things that disgust you." As the war spread deeper into the galaxy, more species began to understand what the humans had been trying to tell them. Peace was fragile. Civilization was a thin layer over the brutal reality of survival. When faced with an enemy that wanted to consume everything, moral luxuries became deadly weaknesses. The humans watched with mixed emotions as peaceful aliens learned to think like warriors. It was necessary for their survival, but it meant the end of something beautiful. The innocence of a galaxy that had known only peace. But in the converted matter of consumed worlds, in the growing energy signatures of devourer fleets, in the desperate reports from the battle lines, One truth became clear. The alternative to becoming warriors was becoming nothing at all. The galaxy's age of peace was over. The age of war had begun again. And this time, thanks to the knowledge carried by 1,000 sleeping humans, they might actually have a chance to win. The only question was whether they could learn to fight like humans before the enemy learned to consume like gods. The final battle began at dawn over Nexus Prime. The capital of the galaxy hung in space like a jewel, surrounded by the largest fleet in recorded history. Ships from hundreds of worlds formed defensive lines, their weapons charged and ready. But everyone knew it might not be enough. The Devourer mothership appeared at the edge of the system like a growing cancer. It was larger than anything in the historical records, a massive sphere of converted matter that pulsed with dark energy. Around it, smaller vessels swarmed like parasites, each one capable of consuming an entire world. Taimin stood on the bridge of the flagship New Dawn, watching the enemy approach. Around him, alien officers worked at stations that had been retrofitted with human technology. The entire fleet had been rebuilt in the past months, incorporating lessons learned from humanity's ancient war. Enemy fleet size? He asked. Sensors. Show over 10,000 vessels, reported the Zenthari tactical officer. But the mothership is off the scale. It's larger than some moons. Taimin nodded calmly. He had seen worse odds during humanity's final stand. The question wasn't whether they could win. It was whether they could win without losing everything they were trying to protect. Signal all fleet commanders, he ordered. Begin Operation Last Light. Across the galaxy, the plan that had been months in the making began to unfold. It was a strategy that combined human ruthlessness with alien ingenuity, sacrifice with hope, desperation with careful calculation. Hana worked frantically in the fleet's engineering section, making final adjustments to the weapon she had spent the last year building. It was based on the same principles that humanity had used in their final offensive 3,000 years ago, but improved and refined by the knowledge of multiple species. Will it work? Asked her Velkari assistant. It has to, Hana replied, connecting the last power coupling, because if it doesn't, there won't be anyone left to build another one. The battle began with a coordinated assault by the combined fleet. Thousands of ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapon systems upgraded with human technology. Energy, beams and projectiles filled space like a deadly light show. The Devourers responded with their usual efficiency. Their vessels moved with unnatural coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. They had learned from their encounters with humanity and adapted their tactics accordingly. Du Hyun commanded a squadron of fast attack ships, leading them in hit-and-run strikes against the enemy flanks. The tactics were purely human. Strike hard, retreat fast, never engage in a prolonged fight you couldn't win. Remember, he transmitted to his pilots, we're not trying to destroy them all. We're buying time for the primary weapon to charge. His squadron swept in, targeting the Devourer's smaller escort vessels. The aliens flying with him had learned human combat techniques, but it still felt strange to see Zenthari pilots performing, kamikaze runs and Aquari captains ordering their crews to ram enemy ships. The war had changed everyone. So Young coordinated medical efforts from the fleet hospital ship. She watched the casualty reports stream in and felt the familiar weight of decisions no doctor should have to make. Triage on this scale meant choosing who lived and who died based on pure mathematical calculation. But the aliens around her had learned these lessons too. Zenthari medics made life and death choices with the same cold efficiency that had once been purely human. The war had taught them that sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. The battle raged for hours. The combined fleet fought with a coordination and ruthlessness that surprised even the humans. Species that had never known conflict showed they could learn the harsh lessons of survival when their existence depended on it. But the Devourer mothership continued its advance toward Nexus Prime. Its massive bulk shrugged off attacks that should have crippled it. Worse, it was growing larger as it consumed the debris of destroyed ships, converting the wreckage into more of itself. Primary weapon status? Taimin asked. 80% charged, Hana reported. But we need to get closer to the mothership for maximum effect. How close? Dangerously close. Taemin made the decision that would define the battle's outcome. All ships form up for a final assault. We're going to escort the new dawn to point-blank range. The fleet reformed around the flagship. What remained of the once mighty armada, perhaps 3,000 ships out of the original 10,000, moved toward the enemy mothership in a formation that was part attack and part funeral procession. The Devourers seemed to sense what was coming. Their attacks intensified, focusing on the flagship with desperate fury. Ships exploded around the new dawn as captains chose to intercept attacks meant for the weapon ship. Ginny watched from the communication center as vessels from dozens of worlds sacrificed themselves without hesitation. The war had taught them, all the most human lesson of all, sometimes survival required others to die. Distance to target? Asked Taemin. 5,000 kilometers and closing, reported the navigation officer. Weapon charge? 95%, called Hana. Almost. Ready? The mothership filled their view screens now, a massive sphere of alien architecture that pulsed with malevolent energy. Point defense systems lanced out, destroying the last of the escort vessels. Only the new dawn remained, racing toward the heart of enemy power. Weapon ready, Hana announced. Fire, ordered Taemin. The weapon that Hana had built was not just a destroyer, it was a creator. Based on human technology but enhanced by alien science, it didn't simply destroy matter. It reorganized the fundamental forces of space-time itself. The beam struck the Devourer mothership and seemed to do nothing for a moment. Then reality began to tear around the impact point. A sphere of twisted space-time expanded outward, consuming the mothership and everything around it. But instead of simply destroying, the weapon created something new. A barrier of folded space that sealed the gap between galaxies. Any Devourers that remained in dark space would find themselves cut off, unable to cross the void between star systems. The mothership collapsed into itself, taking most of the remaining Devourer fleet with it. The few enemy vessels that survived found themselves trapped in normal space, their connection to the hive mind severed. The battle was over. The galaxy had won. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Of the 10,000 ships that had begun the battle, fewer than 500 remained. Entire species had lost their homeworlds to the Devourer advance. Millions had died in the fighting. Taemin stood in the ruins of the New Dawn's bridge and realized that only a few hundred humans had survived the final battle. They were truly the last now, the final remnants of a species that had been shaped by war. What happens now? Asked So Young. Now we rebuild, said Hana, but not the way things were before. The galaxy has learned what we learned. That peace is something you fight for, not something you just hope for. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to change in ways that would have been unimaginable before the war. Military academies were established on every major world. Children learned tactics and strategy alongside mathematics and literature. Peaceful species maintained standing armies and defensive fleets. The humans helped establish the Eternal War Memorial on a restored Earth, not just for humanity's sacrifice, but for all the species that had learned the price of survival. The memorial carried a simple message in 1,000 languages. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is the presence of those strong enough to defend it. So Young, now one of the last 300 humans in existence, found herself teaching alien children about courage and sacrifice. They looked at her with eyes that held too much knowledge for their ages. They were the generation that would never know the innocent peace their parents had enjoyed. Will the Devourers come back? Asked a young Xanthari student. Probably not, So Young replied. But something else will. There's always something else out there in the dark. That's why we prepare. That's why we remember. That's why we stay. Strong. The student nodded with understanding that would have horrified peacetime adults. The war had changed everyone, turning an entire galaxy of civilians into a civilization of warriors. But it had also given them something precious, the knowledge that they could survive anything the universe threw at them. They had faced the darkness between galaxies and won. They had learned the hardest lesson of all. That love for peace sometimes required the willingness to wage war. The humans had given the galaxy more than tactical knowledge or advanced weapons. They had given them the warrior's heart, the understanding that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth becoming monsters to protect. As the memorial's eternal flame burned bright against the stars, children who would never know innocent peace practiced the skills they hoped they would never need. They carried the legacy of the eternal war, the knowledge that freedom and safety were not gifts, but achievements that had to be earned again and again. The age of peace was over. The age of preparedness had begun. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, ancient enemies dreamed of revenge while new barriers held them at bay. But if they ever found a way through, they would not face the naive civilizations they had consumed before. They would face the students of humanity, species that had learned the hardest truths about survival and chosen to remember them. The eternal war was over, but its lessons would last.